Terrell Caldwell was 38 years old when he booked his wife's birthday girls' trip to Miami without asking a single question. 8 years of marriage, and he'd never once doubted Imani. Not when she took calls in another room. Not when she flinched at the mention of their joint account. He told himself, successful men trust their wives. That Thursday, a routine client visit happened to land him 3 miles from her resort. He decided to stop by, flowers in hand, just to surprise her. The front desk clerk pulled up her reservation to confirm the room number. 1 room, not 2, like Imani had told him before she left with her best friend. Terrell walked toward the pool deck, telling himself there had to be an explanation. Then he saw her, laughing, sun-kissed, her hand resting on a man's arm with the kind of ease that comes from practice, not impulse. A man from her past, a man Terrell recognized instantly. He didn't say a word. He didn't move. And in that single frozen moment by the pool, Terrell made a decision that would end far more than just his marriage. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The house on Briar Glen Court wasn't the biggest one on the street, but it was the most solid. Terrell Caldwell had built his reputation on that exact difference. Any fool with money could buy big. It took something else entirely. Patience, precision, a refusal to cut corners, to build something that would actually last. He stood at the edge of the Whitmore renovation site on a Tuesday morning, coffee going cold in his hand, watching his crew work. The house was a 1940s Craftsman in East Atlanta. Bones still good, but the skin showing every one of its 80 years. His guys were pulling rotted siding off the north face, stacking it neat by the curb the way he'd trained them to. No mess, no rushing. "Marcus," Terrell's voice carried across the yard without him raising it. "That beam on the second window frame. Look again." Marcus, 24 years old and still learning what his eyes were for, squinted up at it, looked back at Terrell. "Looks straight to me." "It's not." Terrell set his coffee down on the tailgate of his truck and walked over. He put one hand flat against the frame. "Feel that." Marcus pressed his palm to the wood. A second passed. Then he felt it. The faint give where there shouldn't be any. Soft rot, hiding just under the surface. "I didn't even see that," Marcus said. "That's the job," Terrell said simply. He picked his coffee back up. "You don't just look, you check." That was Terrell Caldwell in 4 words. You don't just look. At 38, he owned Caldwell Contracting outright. No partners, no investors, no family money behind it. Just 10 years of early mornings, low bids on small jobs, and a standard of work that spread by word of mouth until the word was everywhere. He had 12 full-time crew members now, a leased yard on the south side of Atlanta where he kept his equipment, and a backlog of work that ran 4 months deep. He'd built all of it from a single used truck and a toolbox he'd bought at an auction when he was 26. He never forgot that. He didn't let himself. By 5:30, he was pulling into the driveway of the house on Briar Glen Court. It was a 4-bedroom colonial, cream with dark shutters, with a wide porch and a yard that Terrell kept groomed himself on weekends. He'd bought it 5 years into the marriage, put in the floors himself. Refinished the staircase over one long Thanksgiving weekend while Imani's family was visiting, because he couldn't stand the way the old treads creaked. He loved this house the way he loved most things he'd worked for. Quietly, completely. Inside, the kitchen light was on. He could hear the low sound of the TV from the living room. He dropped his work bag by the door and found Imani at the stove, stirring something that smelled like the garlic shrimp she made when she didn't feel like cooking anything complicated. "Hey," she said, not turning around right away. "Hey." He crossed the kitchen and kissed the side of her head. She leaned into it, just slightly, the way she always did, but her eyes stayed on the pan. Imani Caldwell was 30 years old, sharp and pretty, In a low-key way she'd never seemed to fully believe about herself. She had handled the books for Caldwell Contracting part-time for the last 4 years, and she was good at it. Organized. Thorough. She knew his accounts almost as well as he did. Or at least, that's what he'd always assumed. Lately, something had been sitting differently between them. He couldn't name it exactly. She wasn't cruel. She wasn't cold. She was just tired. Or said she was. A lot. She'd been going to bed early for months, keeping her phone face down on the counter, taking calls in the bedroom with the door mostly closed, coming back out and saying it was Dominique. Just Dominique. Girl talk. Nothing interesting. He hadn't pushed. That wasn't his style. But 2 weeks ago, he'd mentioned offhand that he was going to log into their joint account to move some money around for the Miami trip. And something had crossed her face, just for a second, quick as a shadow, before she said, "Oh, I already handled it. Don't worry about it." He hadn't pressed then, either. He was generous, Terrell. People who knew him said so without hesitation. When Imani told him she wanted to do something real for her 30th, a girls' trip to Miami with Dominique, a nice resort, a few days in the sun, he hadn't blinked. He'd told her to pick somewhere good. He'd covered the flights, the hotel, spending money, all of it. She deserved it, he'd told himself. 8 years of holding things down, keeping the books, being his person. She deserved a trip. He drove her to the airport that Friday morning before sunrise. She had a rolling carry-on and her big tote bag, the tan one she always took on trips. She was in good spirits, lighter than she'd been in weeks, actually, laughing at something on her phone as he merged onto the highway. He carried her bag to the drop-off curb. She turned and hugged him, and he held on for a moment longer than she did. "Have fun," he said. "I will." She pulled back and smiled at him. "Don't work the whole weekend." "No promises." She laughed at that, touched his arm once. Then she turned and walked through the sliding glass doors without looking back. Terrell stood at the curb and watched until she was gone. The call came in on a Saturday. Terrell was in the yard at the South Side lot, running inventory on lumber prices for the Whitmore job, when his phone buzzed with a number he half recognized. A 305 area code. Miami. He picked up. The man on the other end was named Gerald Okafor, a property developer, referred by one of Terrell's longtime clients up in Buckhead. Gerald had a triplex in Miami's Wynwood neighborhood. Water damage, foundation concerns, the whole picture. He wanted Terrell to take a look before he committed to anyone local. He was sorry for the short notice. Could Terrell possibly make it down this week? Terrell looked at his inventory list, looked at the calendar in his head. The Whitmore job was in a holding pattern, waiting on a permit approval that wasn't coming before Wednesday at the earliest. "I can do Monday," Terrell said. He booked the flight that evening, round trip, Monday to Tuesday. Found a room at a small hotel in Wynwood, a couple miles from Gerald's property. He didn't think much about the proximity at first. Miami was a big city. He was staying on the other side of it from where Imani was. But then, Sunday night, sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open, he pulled up the resort website to look up the address, just to see how far it was, just out of habit. The same habit that made him check beam frames and look twice at foundation cracks. The Dorado Beach Resort, 42 minutes from Wynwood. He sat with that for a moment, then he closed the laptop and went to bed. Gerald's property took most of Monday morning. The foundation issues were real but manageable. Terrell walked through it twice, took measurements, asked the right questions, and left Gerald with a preliminary estimate and a handshake that felt like it was going somewhere solid. By noon, he was back in his rental car. He sat in the parking lot for a moment with the engine running. 42 minutes. He thought about calling Imani, thought about texting her. "Hey, funny thing, I'm actually in Miami for work. Swing by and surprise you?" But something stopped him. That small, quiet thing that had been sitting in the back of his mind since the morning he drove her to the airport. He couldn't name it clearly, just a feeling, low and steady, like a beam that looked fine until you pressed your palm against it and felt the give underneath. He pulled out of the parking lot and headed south. He stopped at a grocery store on the way and bought flowers, sunflowers, because those were her favorites. A good bunch, bright and full, wrapped in brown paper. He told himself it was a nice thing to do. Show up unexpected with her favorite flowers. She'd laugh. She'd call him ridiculous. It would be a good story. He held on to that version all the way to the Dorado Beach Resort. The lobby was the kind of place that knew it was impressive and didn't have to try too hard about it. Cool marble floors, high ceilings with slow-turning fans, the smell of salt air and something expensive coming through the open corridor that faced the ocean, a long front desk, dark wood, staffed by 2 people in matching cream shirts. Terrell walked up to the desk with the flowers in his hand. "Hi there." The woman at the counter smiled at him. "Checking in?" "No." He smiled back, easy and calm. "My wife is staying here, Imani Caldwell. I was hoping to have these sent up to her room. Or, if you could confirm her room number, I can bring them up myself and surprise her." The woman typed the name into her system, looked at the screen, typed again. "Caldwell," she said. "Yes, I have the reservation. 1 room, a king suite. 1 room." Terrell kept his face still. "Just the 1 room? She mentioned she was here with a friend." The woman glanced at the screen again. "The reservation is for 1 guest. Imani Caldwell." A small pause. "It also shows a checkout date of Thursday." Terrell felt something shift very quietly inside his chest. Today was Monday. Imani had told him she was flying home Wednesday morning. She had sent him her return flight confirmation herself. He'd seen the email. Wednesday, 10:15 a.m., Delta, Miami to Atlanta. Thursday, checkout. 1 room. "Great," he said. His voice came out level, unhurried. "Actually, I'll just find her myself. Thank you." He set the sunflowers down on the edge of the counter. The woman looked at them, then at him, unsure whether to say something. He was already walking. Not fast, not slow. The same pace he used on a job site when something had gone wrong, and the crew was watching to see how he'd handle it. Steady, purposeful. The lobby opened into a wide breezeway, and beyond it, the pool deck stretched out toward the ocean. Terrell could hear it now. Voices, music, the splash of water, the specific lazy sound of people who had nowhere to be. He walked toward it. The sunflowers stayed on the counter behind him. The pool deck at the Dorado Beach Resort was packed. It was a Monday afternoon, but you wouldn't have known it. People covered every lounge chair. Waitstaff moved between them with trays of drinks. A DJ at the far end played something slow and warm that floated over the water like it belonged there. Terrell stepped out of the breezeway and stopped at the edge of it all. He scanned the crowd the way he scanned a job site, methodically, section by section, left to right. He still had a small, quiet voice in the back of his head telling him there was an explanation. 1 room because Dominique booked separately. The Thursday date, a hotel system error. Imani somewhere out here in a lounge chair with her best friend, laughing and unbothered, and him about to feel foolish for driving 42 minutes with grocery store flowers. He held on to that voice, let it do its work, while his eyes kept moving. He found her in about 30 seconds. She was near the far end of the pool, close to the water. She had on a yellow swimsuit, the color of the sunflowers he'd left at the front desk. Her hair was up. Her skin caught the sun and gave it back. She was laughing at something. A real laugh. Head tilted back, hand pressed to her chest, the way she did when something genuinely caught her off guard. Terrell's eyes moved to the man beside her. He was leaning back in the chair next to hers, watching her laugh like he'd heard 1,000 of them and planned on hearing 1,000 more. Tall, relaxed, comfortable in his own skin, the way men get when they've stopped having to prove anything. He had a drink in his hand. He was smiling. Terrell knew the face. He'd seen it in old photos, Facebook pictures from years ago, before Imani had quietly scrubbed her college years from her profile. A face that had meant nothing to him then because it belonged to the past. Her college ex, Brandon. The quiet voice in the back of Terrell's head went completely silent. He didn't move. He stayed at the edge of the deck, half in the shadow of the breezeway overhang, and he watched. Imani said something. Brandon laughed. She reached over and touched his forearm. Not a brush, not an accident. A touch with weight behind it. Her hand rested there for a moment, easy and familiar, the way you touch someone whose skin you already know. Brandon turned his arm slightly, just enough to close the space between them without making a production of it. Terrell understood what he was looking at. This wasn't a run-in. This wasn't a coincidence. There was no Dominique. There was no girls' trip. There was a king suite reserved for one guest and a checkout date 3 days after the flight home she'd showed him on paper. He stood there long enough to be sure. Long enough that there was nothing left to argue with himself about. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He kept it low, kept his body still. He framed the shot carefully. Both of them in it, her hand on his arm, their chairs pulled close together, the resort visible in the background. He pressed the button once. One photo. That was all he needed. He looked at it for exactly 2 seconds. Then he put his phone back in his pocket, turned around, and walked back through the breezeway the same way he'd come in. Same pace. Same steady stride. Not fast. Not slow. The flight home was an hour and 40 minutes. Terrell spent most of it looking out the window at nothing. The photo sat in his phone, unopened. He didn't need to look at it again. It was already filed away in the part of his mind where he kept things that were true and settled. He thought about what he knew. He thought about what he didn't know yet. The affair was one thing. It hurt the way it was supposed to hurt. Deep, specific, the kind of pain that had a shape to it. But somewhere underneath that hurt was a question that kept rising to the surface, steady and insistent. She handles the books. He'd trusted her with access to his company's accounts for 3 years. Invoices, supply orders, vendor payments. She saw everything. She moved money. Small amounts, usually, the kind of transactions that blurred together over the course of a week. He pressed his fingers together in his lap and thought about that. He had no proof. Not yet. But the same instinct that caught a mismatched hotel reservation could not let that question go unanswered. By the time the plane touched down at Hartsfield-Jackson and the wheels hit the tarmac with a hard, clean thud, he had already decided. No confrontation. Not yet. Not until he understood the full picture. He walked off the plane and through the terminal and out to the parking deck without stopping. He got in his truck. He sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel. Then he pulled out his phone and called his sister. Keisha picked up on the second ring. "Hey, you," she said. "Thought you were in Miami." "I'm back." His voice was calm, even. "I need a favor." "It's not small." A pause. "Tell me." "I need you to look at the company books," he said. "Quietly. All of it. The last couple of years, if you can." Another pause. Longer this time. "Terrell." Her voice shifted. "Careful now. What am I looking for?" "I don't know yet," he said. "But I think you'll know it when you see it." Keisha arrived at 7:45. Terrell was already there. He'd been there since 6:30, sitting at his desk with a cup of coffee that had gone cold, staring at nothing in particular. The office was a converted room at the back of his shop on Fulton Industrial, metal shelving along one wall, a whiteboard covered in project timelines, a beat-up desk that had followed him from his first location. Nothing fancy, everything functional. He heard her key in the back door. She was the only other person who had one. She came in carrying a laptop bag over one shoulder and a coffee from the place 2 blocks down. She looked at him the way she always looked at him when something was wrong. Not asking yet, just reading. Keisha had a gift for that. She could walk into a room and take a person's temperature in about 4 seconds. She set her coffee down on the edge of the desk and studied his face. "You look like you haven't slept," she said. "I slept," he said. She clearly didn't believe him, but she let it go. That was another gift of hers. "All right." She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, unzipping her bag. "Walk me through what you want." Terrell had already thought carefully about how to say this. He needed her sharp and focused, not distracted by questions he wasn't ready to answer. "Routine audit," he said. "I want fresh eyes on the supply accounts, vendor payments, the works. Imani's been managing it, but I want it checked clean. You know how it is. You get too close to something. You stop seeing it." Keisha looked at him steadily. "This feel routine to you?" "I just want it done right," he said. She held his gaze for one more second. Then she opened her laptop. "Okay, give me your login." He gave her the desk and moved to the other side of the office, making calls, reviewing site schedules, doing the work that needed doing. He kept his back mostly to her, but he was listening. For the first 2 hours, it was quiet. Just the sound of keys, the soft click of her mouse, the occasional page turning as she cross-referenced printed statements against what was on the screen. Keisha worked the way she always worked, head down, unhurried, precise. She had spent 17 years as a forensic accountant, and she moved through financial records the way Terrell moved through a construction site. She knew what belonged and what didn't. He was on a call with a subcontractor when he heard her stop typing. Not a pause, a full stop. He wrapped up the call quickly, turned around. Keisha was leaning forward, her reading glasses pushed up on her nose, her eyes moving back and forth between her screen and a printed bank statement she'd pulled from the stack he'd given her. Her jaw was tight. "Come look at this," she said. He walked over and stood behind her. She pointed at the screen. A column of transactions in the supply account, each one small enough to look like nothing. $40 here, $60 there. Sometimes 90, sometimes 110. Never a round number. Never a pattern obvious enough to catch the eye if you weren't looking for it. "These transfers," Keisha said, "they're going out every 2 to 3 weeks. Different amounts each time. Small enough not to flag automatically." She tapped the screen. "They're all routing to the same place. An LLC called B. Wells Consulting." The name landed quietly. Terrell kept his face still. He put his hands in his pockets. "B. Wells. Brandon Wells." He said nothing. He just looked at the screen and breathed slowly and let the information sit exactly where it needed to sit. In the part of his mind where facts were stored, not feelings. "You recognize that vendor?" Keisha asked, watching him. "No," he said. Truthful enough. "Me neither." She pulled up a second window. I did a quick check. The LLC was registered in Georgia about 14 months ago. Single member, minimal public filings, no real web presence I can find. Whatever they're supposedly consulting on, there's no record of any actual work product. She paused. "It's thin, Terrell. How far back do the transfers go?" "That's what I need to trace more carefully." She leaned back in the chair. "What I've looked at so far only goes back about 4 months. I need to pull the full 2 years you gave me and go line by line. That's going to take me another day, probably. I want to have real numbers for you before I tell you anything definitive." He nodded once. "How much in the last 4 months alone?" Keisha looked at her screen. "Just over $3,100. That's what I've confirmed so far. $3,100. In 4 months." He kept his face even. "Take the time you need," he said. "But Keisha." He waited until she looked up at him. "This stays between us. Nobody else. Not yet." She held his eyes. Something moved across her face, a question she was filing away for later. "Yeah," she said quietly. "Okay." Keisha was back at 8 the next morning. She didn't knock. She had a key. And she came in the way someone comes in when they've been up half the night and they have something to say. Moving fast, no small talk, laptop already open before she sat down. Terrell had slept 4 hours, maybe 5. He'd lain in the dark in the big house and listened to the quiet, and thought about the way Imani had touched Brandon's arm at that pool. The ease of it, the comfort. That kind of comfort didn't come from a week in Miami. That kind of comfort took time. He'd already known that. But knowing something and having proof of it were two different things. He stood up when Keisha came in. She looked at him. Her face was different from the day before. Tighter, more set. She'd found something. He could see it before she said a single word. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She turned the laptop to face him and set a printed report beside it. 4 pages, single-spaced, columns of figures with dates running down the left margin. She'd highlighted lines in yellow. There were a lot of yellow lines. 14 months, she said, and put her finger on the top of the first page. That's how far back the transfers go. First one was 14 months ago, almost to the day. Small. $52. Easy to miss. Terrell looked at the date. He thought about 14 months ago. He'd been in the middle of the Buckhead townhome project. Big job, long hours. He'd trusted Imani with the books, without a second thought. After that first one, they come regularly, Keisha continued. Every 2 to 3 weeks, like I said. But look at the amounts. She ran her finger down the column. She was careful. Nothing over 150. No round numbers. No pattern a basic review would catch. Whoever was coaching her on this knew what they were doing. Terrell looked at the total at the bottom of the last page. Keisha had circled it in red. $14,180. Nearly $15,000. Pulled from his supply account in pieces small enough to look like noise. Over 14 months. While he was waking up every morning at 6, running his crew, building the thing that was supposed to belong to both of them. The room was quiet. Keisha folded her hands on the desk. Terrell, I need to know what you know. Because what I'm looking at here isn't bookkeeping sloppiness. This is intentional. And it went somewhere. He looked at her. He'd been holding the Miami piece back, keeping it separate, keeping the investigation clean. But it wasn't separate. It never had been. He reached into his jacket pocket and placed his phone on the desk between them. He opened his photos, found the one from the pool deck, and turned the screen toward her. Imani, sun on her shoulders, laughing, leaning into a man with a wide, easy smile, her hand resting on his forearm like it belonged there. Keisha stared at it. "That's Brandon Wells," Terrell said. "Her college ex. I saw them at the resort in Miami the day before yesterday. I flew in for a client referral. She didn't know I was there." He paused. "There was 1 room booked, not 2. The dates go 3 days past what she told me." Keisha didn't say anything right away. She just looked at the photo. Then she looked at the name at the top of the report. B. Wells Consulting. "It's his LLC," she said. Not a question. "That's what I think." She leaned back in her chair and let out a slow breath through her nose. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes were doing the thing they did when she was very angry and working very hard not to show it. A slight tension around the corners. A stillness that didn't come naturally to her. 14 months, she said quietly. "She's been doing this for 14 months? "Yeah. And Dominique is supposedly on this trip with her? Dominique's name is on the itinerary, but she wasn't at that pool." Keisha pressed her lips together. "So Dominique's the cover." Terrell said nothing, which was answer enough. Keisha stood up and walked a short circle in the middle of the room, the way she always moved when she needed to think with her whole body. Then she stopped and looked at him directly. "Tell me what you want to do," she said. "Because I will burn every record in this building if you need me to. Or I will make a case so tight they can't breathe. You tell me." "I need the case," he said. "All of it. Every transfer, every date, every dollar. I need it documented and clean." He looked at her. And I need you to act normal around her. Around all of them. Nobody knows anything until I decide it's time." Keisha looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Okay, I'll keep digging." She sat back down and pulled the laptop toward her. "Go do your job." He picked up the phone from the desk, scrolled past the photo and found the contact he was looking for. Tobias Reyes. He hit call. Tobias Reyes kept a small office on Peachtree, 2 floors above a dry cleaner, in a building that looked modest from the outside. That was on purpose. The man inside was anything but modest. Terrell had known him since their freshman year at Georgia State, back when Tobias wore the same 2 shirts on rotation and ate dining hall food like it was fine dining. That ease, that way of making nothing seem like something, had followed him into law. The receptionist showed Terrell in without making him wait. Tobias was standing at his window when Terrell entered, looking down at the street below with a coffee cup in his hand. He turned when he heard the door. He took one look at Terrell's face and set the cup down. "Close the door," he said. Terrell closed it. They sat across from each other at the small conference table Tobias kept to one side of the room. No desk between them. That was always how Tobias did it with people he trusted. No barrier, no formality. Just 2 men talking. Terrell laid it out in order. The Miami trip, the flowers he never delivered, the front desk clerk with the reservation screen. 1 room, not 2. The dates that ran 3 days longer than what Imani had told him. The pool deck. Brandon Wells. The way Imani's hand rested on his arm like she'd done it 1,000 times, because she probably had. Then Keisha's report. The 14 months, the transfers, $52 at first, then $80, then $97. Never a round number, never big enough to trip an alarm. 14 months of small, careful theft, routed to an LLC called B. Wells Consulting. He placed a copy of the report on the table. Tobias didn't touch it yet. He listened the way good lawyers listen, completely still, no expression, taking in everything before responding to anything. When Terrell finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Tobias picked up the report. He read it slowly, his eyes moving down the columns the same way Keisha's had. He turned to the last page, saw the circled number. He set it down. "Is she still on the business accounts?" Terrell asked. "That's the first thing I need to check." Tobias was already reaching for his pad. "You said she handles the books part-time. Secondary signer?" "Yeah. I added her 3 years ago. Made it easier for payroll, supply orders." Tobias wrote something down. "Walk me through every account she has access to. Business checking, supply, any credit lines." They spent the next 20 minutes doing exactly that. Terrell named them. Tobias wrote each one down, asked questions, and made notes beside each entry. By the end of the list, Tobias had circled 4 accounts and underlined 2 others. "She's a secondary signer on all of it," Terrell said. "Which means she has legal access right now," Tobias said. "And if she has any idea you're onto her, she could move money or create obligations before you could stop her." He tapped his pen on the table. "We need to fix that. Quietly." "How quiet?" "Quiet enough that she goes about her week without a single reason to think anything has changed." Tobias leaned forward. "I can draft a business restructuring. Legitimate on its face. The kind of thing owners do during growth phases. Reclassify her role from signatory to internal bookkeeper. Remove her from the accounts one at a time, spaced out, with clean documentation explaining the change as operational. If she sees it at all, it reads like paperwork, not a threat." Terrell nodded slowly. "What else?" "Divorce paperwork. I can have a full draft ready to file. Petition, asset schedule, everything attached. But I keep it in this drawer." Tobias pointed to the desk across the room. "Nothing gets filed, nothing gets served until you say so. I don't move without your word. I'm not ready to move yet." "I know." Tobias said it plainly, without pushing. "You want the full picture first? I want every piece on the table before I flip it." Terrell said. Tobias looked at him for a moment. Not with sympathy exactly, more like recognition. The look of someone who understood why a man built the way Terrell was built would need to see the whole board before making a move. Then, that's what we do, Tobias said. He gathered the papers into a neat stack and held out his hand. Leave the report with me. I'll keep it in the file. Terrell slid it across. She cannot know. She won't. I'll work through the banks directly. Her name won't come up in any communication that goes to the business address. He paused. You have my word on that. Terrell stood, straightened his jacket, and shook Tobias's hand. The grip was firm and held a second longer than usual. The kind of handshake that meant more than hello or goodbye. It meant, I trust you with this. He walked out of the building and into the late afternoon heat on Peachtree. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, watching the traffic move. The accounts were being locked. The paperwork was being built. The evidence was already documented and clean. What he didn't have yet was the full shape of the lie. He knew the who. He was beginning to know the how. What he needed to know was how far Dominique had been willing to go. Terrell called Dominique on a Tuesday. His voice was easy, relaxed. He told her he was in her part of town for a materials pickup and asked if she wanted to grab lunch, said he'd been meaning to check in since Imani got back, that he felt like they never got to talk without a full table of people around them. Dominique said yes, without hesitating. That told him something. They met at a cafe off Cascade, the kind of place with big windows and small tables and background noise loud enough to make the conversation feel private. Dominique was already there when he arrived, dressed neatly, smiling when she saw him. She hugged him at the door and said she was glad he called. Terrell smiled back, ordered a water, let her talk. She filled the first 10 minutes easily. Her job, her sister's new baby, the HOA nonsense at her condo complex. Terrell listened and nodded and laughed in the right places. He was patient. He was good at patient. Then he let the conversation drift. Imani looked good when she got back, he said, keeping his eyes on the menu. Miami must have been good for her. Oh, yeah. Dominique picked up her water glass. She needed that trip. Which hotel did y'all end up at? She said it was nice. A small pause. Half a second, maybe less. But Terrell caught it. The one on the beach, Dominique said. I can't remember the name. You know I'm bad with names. The Meridian. Yeah, something like that. She nodded a little too quickly. Terrell took a slow sip of water. She said y'all had a room with a balcony overlooking the water. Dominique set her glass down. It was a nice view, yeah. He watched her. She was looking slightly past his shoulder now, not quite at him. She said the room was tight, though. He continued. 2 beds barely fit. Dominique reached for the breadbasket. Terrell let the silence sit for just a beat too long. She told me you two stayed the whole 5 days together, he said. No wandering off. Dominique glanced at him then. Something crossed her face. Quick, like a shadow. We were together most of the time. You know how trips are, though. You do your own thing a little. Sure, Terrell said. Of course. He didn't push. He didn't need to. He simply moved the conversation to something else. Her job. The summer heat. Whether the cafe's salmon was worth ordering. Dominique relaxed again, visibly, her shoulders settling back down. But he had what he came for. Her version had no room number. No hotel name she could hold on to. No clean story of 5 shared days. Just soft edges and fast redirects, and the eyes of a woman managing a lie she'd been carrying for a long time. She hadn't been in Miami with Imani. Or if she hadn't been in that room. She'd been the voice on the other end of the phone. The alibi waiting at home. The name Imani dropped when Terrell asked questions. The friend who smiled at his dinner table while knowing exactly what was happening. He paid the check before she offered. Hugged her at the door the same way she'd hugged him when he arrived. Tell Imani I said hey, he said. I will, she said, already reaching for her keys. He walked to his truck. sat in the driver's seat for a moment without starting the engine. The circle was complete now. Imani, Brandon, Dominique. 3 people. 1 coordinated lie. Running for over a year while Terrell worked job sites and signed paychecks and paid for the trip that made it all possible. He started the truck and headed back to the office. Keisha called Thursday morning. Terrell was on a job site in Buckhead, reviewing a subfloor issue with one of his crew leads, when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He saw her name, excused himself, and walked to the far end of the lot. "Talk to me," he said. "I found something else." Her voice was controlled, but barely. "I was cross-checking against the business loan statements, the equipment loan you took out in March. The lender called me back on that routine paperwork question I submitted." She paused. "Terrell, somebody has been pushing to get Imani added as a co-owner on that loan. Not a signer, a co-owner." He said nothing. "The loan officer, Marcus Webb, his family goes to your parents' church. He said a woman called 3 times over the last 2 months, pressing him to add her name to the ownership line before the next review cycle. He said he stalled because he couldn't reach you directly to confirm. And something felt off." Keisha's voice tightened. "She wasn't trying to steal from you. She was trying to own half of what you built before you could stop her." Terrell stood at the edge of the lot, looking out at nothing. The affair was the cover story. The money transfers were the foundation, and the loan, that was the exit plan. Half the business, clean and legal, waiting for her on the other side of a divorce he didn't know was coming. "Don't let Marcus touch that paperwork," he said. "Already told him to hold everything pending your written instruction." "Good." He turned and walked back toward his truck. "I need to call Tobias." He reached Tobias before noon. "Freeze the loan," Terrell said. "All of it. And pull Marcus Webb's records of those calls. I want documentation of every time she contacted him." "Done," Tobias said. "I'll have it locked by end of day." "Keisha has everything on the transfers. You have the restructuring documents and the divorce draft." "All ready," Tobias said. "Just waiting on you." Terrell looked out through his windshield at the street in front of him. "Then we have everything," he said. Terrell called Imani on a Friday evening. He was sitting in the kitchen when he did it. The lights were low. Dinner was already made. He'd cooked, something he hadn't done in weeks, and the smell of garlic and rice was still in the air. He set the table for 2, poured her a glass of wine. Then he picked up his phone and dialed. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, you," she said. Warm, easy. The voice she used when things felt normal between them. "Hey." He kept his tone light. "I was thinking, Crenshaw project wraps up next week. Biggest job we've had all year. I want to do something to celebrate. A real dinner. My parents' house, both families, the whole thing." A beat of silence. Then, "That sounds really good, Terrell. Been a while since everyone was in the same room," he said. "Feels like we've both been so busy." "I don't know. I just want to be around people I love." "No, I think that's a great idea." Her voice had relaxed into something almost relieved. "I'll call my mom tomorrow. What day were you thinking?" "Saturday week," he said. "Perfect. I'll help plan it." "I was hoping you'd say that." After they hung up, he sat there for a moment. The wine was untouched. The table was set for 2, but the food had already gone cold. He got up, covered the pots, and went to bed early. Imani threw herself into the planning. She texted him links to menu ideas. She called his mother, Miss Evelyn, who loved Imani and didn't yet know why she shouldn't, to coordinate the dishes. She suggested they do it buffet style, so it felt relaxed and festive, not stiff. She volunteered to pick up the dessert herself. Terrell said yes to all of it. He answered her texts promptly. He was present at dinner. He complimented her when she showed him the centerpiece she'd ordered online. White flowers in a low-glass vase, simple and clean. She was happy. The weeks of distance between them, the quiet that had stretched across their house like a second wall, She seemed to believe it was lifting. She laughed a little easier. She touched his arm when she passed him in the hallway. He let her believe it. The guest list came together quickly. His parents, her parents, Dominique and Keisha. 8 people total, counting him and Imani. A full table. Everyone who needed to be in the room would be in the room. While Imani planned the centerpiece, Tobias finished the paperwork. Terrell sat across from him at the law office on a Wednesday afternoon, the week before the dinner, going through it piece by piece. The business restructuring documents were signed and filed. Terrell was now the sole listed owner of Caldwell Contracting, every signature and filing date logged and timestamped. Imani's secondary signing access on the business accounts had been quietly revoked. The equipment loan was frozen, pending the fraud claim Tobias had begun building around the unauthorized co-ownership push. The divorce papers were in a sealed envelope inside Tobias's desk drawer. "The process server will be on standby Saturday evening," Tobias said. "You give me the word during or after dinner. She gets served before she leaves the neighborhood." "After," Terrell said. "Let the whole table see it first." Tobias nodded once. "You want to walk through the order of presentation?" "No," Terrell said. "I know the order." The folder came together over 3 nights. Terrell worked at his desk after Imani went to sleep, moving quietly, the house dark around him. He printed the pool photo first, clean and clear, Imani and Brandon side by side in the Miami sun, her hand easy on his arm. He printed Keisha's full transaction report. 14 months of transfers, each one itemized. The LLC name B. Wells Consulting, appearing again and again in clean black ink. He printed the call logs Marcus Webb had provided. 3 separate calls. Dated, timed, Imani's number on every one of them. Pressing to get her name added to the ownership line of a loan Terrell had never authorized her to touch. He stacked the pages in order, slid them into a plain manila folder, wrote nothing on the cover. He put the folder in his work bag, under his jacket, and left it there. On Saturday evening, Terrell arrived at his parents' house early. He helped his mother carry a pot from the kitchen to the dining room and told her the food smelled perfect. He straightened 2 chairs at the table. He stood at the window for a moment and watched the street. Cars arrived one by one. His parents moved through the kitchen behind him. Imani was at the counter laughing at something his mother said, her earrings catching the light, looking like a woman who had no idea what was about to happen to her life. Dominique arrived in a yellow dress and hugged Imani at the door. Keisha came in last, quiet and composed, and found Terrell's eyes the moment she walked in. He gave her the smallest nod. She took her seat. Terrell moved to the head of the table. He pulled his chair out, settled into it, and placed the folder in his lap with both hands flat on top of it. The table was full. Everyone was here. He waited for the last of the small talk to fade. The first 20 minutes felt like any other family dinner. Ms. Evelyn's baked mac and cheese sat in the center of the table, golden and steaming. Mr. Harold kept refilling everyone's sweet tea without being asked. Imani's father, Gerald, was telling a long story about a parking ticket he'd fought in court, and somehow won, and the table was laughing, and the candles were burning low, and everything looked exactly the way Terrell had needed it to look. Normal, safe, everyone loose and unsuspecting. Imani's mother, Sandra, leaned over and touched Imani's hand at one point, smiling at her daughter with the kind of love that doesn't ask questions. Dominique was 3 seats down, picking at her food, laughing on cue but not quite landing it. Her eyes moved around the table a little too often. She'd glanced at Terrell twice since they sat down. He hadn't looked back at her yet. He ate. He listened. He asked Gerald a follow-up question about the parking ticket and let the man finish his story with full dignity. He thanked his mother for the food. He was present in every way that mattered for those 20 minutes, because he understood something most people didn't, that the moments before were just as important as the moment itself. He waited until the plates were mostly done and the conversation had settled into that easy after-dinner hum. Then he set his fork down and reached beneath the table. The folder made a soft sound when he placed it on the table in front of him. Nobody noticed at first. Gerald was still talking. Keisha went still. Dominique's eyes dropped to the folder and stayed there. "I want to take a second," Terrell said. His voice was calm. Not loud. He didn't need it to be. The table quieted. "I've spent the last few weeks trying to figure out the right way to do this," he said. "I kept coming back to the same answer. Everyone who matters to me is in this room. So this is the right place." Imani looked at him from across the table. Her smile had gone careful. "Terrell, I'm going to let the paperwork do most of the talking," he said. "That way, nobody has to take my word for anything." He opened the folder. The first thing he laid on the table was the photo. He placed it flat, facing the center, so everyone could see it clearly. Imani and Brandon at the Miami pool, her hand on his arm. Both of them laughing, easy and close, the kind of comfortable that doesn't come from a single afternoon. Sandra made a small sound. "That was taken at the Meridian Resort in Miami," Terrell said. "The same resort I paid for. The reservation, which I also confirmed with the front desk, was for 1 room, not 2, and it ran 3 days longer than what Imani told me." "Terrell, I can explain," Imani started. The second thing. He placed Keisha's transaction report on top of the photo. Clean pages, itemized rows, dates running down the left column in small black print. 14 months of transfers from the company's supply account. Small amounts, moved carefully, so they wouldn't flag during a routine review. Every one of them routed to an LLC called B. Wells Consulting. Brandon Wells. Gerald put his fork down. And the third. The bank call log. Printed clean. 3 separate calls, all from Imani's number, made to our bank contact, pressuring him to add her name as co-owner on a business loan I never approved, never signed off on, and never authorized. Terrell closed the folder and folded his hands on top of it. The table was completely silent. He looked down the row at Dominique. She was staring at her plate, jaw tight, both hands in her lap. "Dom," he said. She didn't look up. "You want to tell them? Or you want me to?" A long beat. Then Dominique pressed her fingers to her mouth, and her eyes filled. "I'm sorry," she said. It came out broken. "Terrell, I'm so sorry. She asked me to cover for her. I didn't know it would go this far." "How long?" Sandra asked. Her voice was flat. She was looking at her daughter. "Over a year," Dominique said quietly. Imani's chair scraped the floor. "This is unbelievable." Her voice was sharp now, bright with something between panic and fury. "You want to sit here and put on a show, in front of our families, like you've been some perfect husband? You work 7 days a week, Terrell. You were never home. I was lonely," he said. He said it without a single edge in his voice. "Imani," her father's voice. Gerald said her name like a period at the end of a sentence. "The paperwork is real," Terrell said. "The photo is real. None of that changes because of how many hours I worked." Imani looked around the table, searching for somewhere to land. She found nothing. Her mother had turned away from her. Gerald was looking at the table. Dominique was crying quietly into her hand. "The divorce papers are already filed," Terrell said. "You'll be served tomorrow morning." Sandra Pierce stood up. She smoothed the front of her dress once, and then she looked at Dominique. "I think you should go," she said. Not angry, just done. Dominique stood, grabbed her purse, and walked to the door without a word. It closed behind her with a quiet click. Terrell rose from his chair. The divorce was filed on a Tuesday. By Thursday, Imani had moved out of the house and into her mother's spare bedroom. Terrell knew because Gerald called him, not to argue, not to take sides, just to say he was sorry, and that he meant it. Terrell thanked him and let the man go. Gerald hadn't done anything wrong. Neither had Sandra. They'd raised a daughter and loved her the best they knew how, and none of what Imani chose was on them. Terrell didn't hold it against the family. He just let the distance settle in naturally, the way it had to. Tobias moved fast and quietly, the way he always did. Within 2 weeks of the dinner, company ownership was fully restructured and locked. Imani's name had been removed from every business account, every signing authority, every document that had ever given her access. The business was Terrell's, cleanly, completely, on paper, and in fact. Whatever a divorce court might eventually say about marital assets, the company wasn't sitting exposed waiting for someone to pick it apart. But the loan attempt was a different matter. "I want to be clear about something," Tobias said, sitting across from Terrell in his office one afternoon, a folder open between them. "You could let the bank forgery attempt go. A lot of people would. Settle the divorce, walk away clean, move on." He paused. "But you'd be leaving a door open." "Close the door," Terrell said. Tobias nodded like he'd expected exactly that answer. The fraud claim went forward. 3 counts, documented thoroughly. The unauthorized calls to the bank contact, the forged co-ownership paperwork. The paper trail of pressure applied over several weeks to push it through without Terrell's knowledge. The bank contact, a man named Darren who'd known both Terrell and Imani through mutual friends for years, provided a full written statement. He'd felt pressured. He hadn't known how to say no without causing damage. He was relieved someone had finally made it official. Imani's attorney called Tobias within 48 hours of the filing, trying to negotiate the claim down to nothing. Tobias was polite. He was also immovable. "The documentation is complete," he told Terrell afterward, without a hint of drama. "She's going to feel this one." The Brandon piece came apart a few weeks later, the way most careful lies eventually do. Not from one big discovery, but from one small thread pulled at the right time. Tobias's investigator, a methodical woman named Carla, who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and rarely raised her voice, had been running a background sweep on B. Wells Consulting since Terrell first brought the shell account to Tobias's attention. What Carla found wasn't complicated. It was just quiet. Brandon Wells had done this before. 2 years earlier, a woman named Renata Sims in Charlotte had run a small event planning business. She'd reconnected with Brandon, an old acquaintance, not even a romantic history the way Imani had, and he'd worked his way into her trust over several months before she started routing small payments to a consulting account for marketing services she never fully received. By the time she realized what had happened, he'd moved on. The case had been reported, but never formally pursued, because Renata hadn't had the documentation to make it stick. She had a lawyer, though. His name was in the public filing. Terrell read Carla's report at his kitchen table on a Wednesday night, the house quiet around him for the first time in a long time. He read it twice. Then he called Tobias. "Get me the Charlotte attorney's contact information," he said. 3 days later, Renata Sims's lawyer had a copy of everything Terrell and Keisha had compiled. Every transfer record, every date, every dollar amount routed through B. Wells Consulting. The 2 cases, side by side, told a story no single piece of paper could have told alone. Brandon wasn't someone who made mistakes. He was someone who ran a method. Imani was the second iteration they could document. There was no reason to believe she was the last. Brandon was named in both fraud claims within the same week. His consulting front, the thing he'd built his entire scheme around, was shut down under legal pressure before the month was out. Imani found out about Charlotte from her own attorney, who told her because she had to. Terrell wasn't there to see her reaction. He didn't need to be. But a mutual acquaintance, someone who'd seen Imani at a restaurant shortly after the news broke, told Keisha later that Imani had looked like someone had pulled the floor out from under her. Not just caught, not just exposed, something worse than that. She'd understood, in that moment, that she was never the point. Brandon hadn't chosen her, hadn't loved her, hadn't seen something in her that he couldn't find anywhere else. He'd seen a woman with bookkeeping access to a healthy business, and a husband who trusted her. And he'd done what he always did. She was a method. She was a transaction. She was the second one they knew about. Dominique, for her part, had been cut off by both families inside of 2 weeks after the dinner. No dramatic conversation, no long goodbye. Just two families, separately and quietly, deciding they were done. 6 months passed. Terrell barely noticed how fast they went. He was too busy working. The Harmon Group project, a full-scale mixed-use renovation in Midtown Atlanta, the biggest single contract his company had ever signed, had come through in the second month after the divorce was finalized. 62,000 square feet. A 14-month timeline. A budget that would have made the version of him who'd started this company in his late 20s go completely still. He'd built his crew up for it, hired 3 new site leads, brought in 2 specialty subcontractors he'd been watching for years, waiting for a job big enough to justify the relationship. He worked 6 days a week and made sure his people felt it. Not the pressure, but the purpose. The sense that what they were doing together was worth doing right. On the last day of the 6th month, the Harmon project hit its first major milestone. The structural work was complete. The bones of the building stood clean and solid, every beam where it was supposed to be, every load-bearing wall exactly as the plans called for. Terrell stood in the main doorway of the ground-floor unit, the one that would eventually be a restaurant. The space was open and unfinished. Raw concrete floor, exposed ceiling, the smell of sawdust and new lumber hanging in the still air. Late afternoon light came in through the tall front windows and stretched across the floor in long, warm panels. He had a key in his hand. Not symbolic, just the actual site key. A standard brass thing on a plain ring, the kind he carried every day. He turned it over once. The building was solid. The company was his, fully, legally, permanently his. Nobody's name on it, but his own. Nobody's access but the people he chose. Nobody positioned to walk quietly through the back of it and take what he'd spent his life building. He looked out at the empty floor and let himself feel it. Not the anger, not the grief, not the months of careful, deliberate work it had taken to get here. Just this, the finished thing, the standing thing. He pocketed the key and turned back toward the site. There was still a lot of work left to do. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.